How would you like a 15% discount to my daily email, the stack of stuff, the show notes, discounts to the conference, all of that? All you need to do is text the word show to 33777. You'll get the annual subscription with a 15% discount to my daily email. You'll get the stack of stuff, the links to the show notes, discounts to the conference, and so much more. All you have to do is text the word show, SHOW, to 33777. Text show to 33777.
Welcome to the Eric Erickson Show podcast, Hour 3.
Hello, America. Welcome. It is Eric Erickson here across the nation. The phone number 877-973-7425. Should you wish to be on the program, would be delighted to have you if you text the word Eric, E-R-I-C-K, to 33777. Get the live stream, the show notes, all those fine things to keep in touch with the show and stay informed. So I need to put something on your radar. It's a very interesting report from the Alliance for Consumers Action about lawfare in America. They have a new report out on it. Now, let me explain what's going on here. In the United States, in the 1980s and 90s, there began to be a shift in party preference in the South and the Midwest. Those had historically been Democratic areas of the country. The mythology that the left has concocted to explain it is that all the racist Democrats became racist Republicans, and the people in those areas decided to start voting for the racist Republicans. Never mind that George Wallace, for example, and Robert Byrd stayed Democrats forever. It's just the Democrats tell themselves stories, and they make up this mythology to explain why they're out of power. Instead of Icarus flying too close to the sun and his wings melted and he fell, no, it's just the racists started voting Republican. That's why we lost power. One of the ways that Democrats have in the last 30 years tried to compensate for losing power in the nation is lawsuits. In many states, it is groups of liberal trial lawyers are the ones who pick the Supreme Courts of those states. Take, for example, Wyoming. Wyoming is a very conservative state, but in Wyoming, it's a panel of lawyers who make the recommendations on who will be on the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court of Wyoming is far to the left of where the people of Wyoming are because of these judicial panels. And that's how judges get picked. And then at the federal level, you can also pick districts in which to file lawsuits, knowing, well, all these judges in this district were picked by Democrats. I'm going to get a favorable result. And the Republicans do it as well. I mentioned the other day the Flores decision, which was a Janet Reno, Bill Clinton compromise settlement in California court that agreed to the terms of a left-wing immigration group on keeping children in detention facilities for no more than 20 days. And they have permanently bound the federal government unless Congress acts. They bound future presidential administrations to the way they have to process child detainees. And in cases we've now discovered where you get these progressive groups that get kids out of detainment, they don't have family to go to. They go to these progressive groups and they shove them into child labor in factories that are run by Democrats. That true story that's actually happened. And now in Florida, the Ron DeSantis administration has forced the Trump administration before a conservative judge to settle to prohibit parole for illegal immigrants in the United States. We are now learning to engage in lawfare the way the left has. But the left has really mastered it. And the Alliance for Consumers Action has this report out today on essentially how the legal system is being used to advance and install a left-wing agenda, because the Democrats talk about the preservation of democracy, but they only care about democracy when it preserves left-wing power. They don't care about democracy really. They care about democracy if it serves their purposes, and otherwise they run to court. And they use left-wing judges to impose policy prescriptions on the country. And one of the things that they're doing is advancing left-wing environmental activism. You know, it's been exposed recently that progressive interest groups helped write a section on environmental law for federal judges. And once it was exposed, they had to strip it out of this manual that was written to help federal judges think about these issues. The Federal Judicial Center had to remove the chapter on climate science from their judicial reference manual. The original chapter was full of liberal ideology that favored the left's litigation efforts, and it read like a playbook for climate lawfare filed against the energy industry in recent years by environmental groups. The chapter was actually co-written by a lady named Jessica Wentz, a climate activist that actually works with anti-energy litigation groups. So it was West Virginia, by the way, that led the charge on getting this out of the Federal Judicial Center's reference manual on scientific evidence. The left actually wrote the chapter on analyzing scientific evidence in a way that actually benefited settled science standards and instead substituted consensus standards for left-wing academics on the environment. Overplaying, for example, the evidence related to carbon dioxide, overplaying the evidence related to methane, overplaying a lot of evidence related to natural gas, pipelines, things like that. Judges would go in and read their supposedly objective reference manual on thinking about the law and the science on these issues, and it was written by left-wing interest groups designed to propagandize judges. And in fact, it's been exposed that a number of left-wing federal judges have been working in concert with left-wing environmental lawfare groups to advance their positions. So, for example, in Montana, you had a situation where the children sued, demanding that the state of Montana take action to save the planet from evil pipeline industries and the natural gas industry and the mining industries because they were destroying the planet for the children. And the result is local judges in Montana, in some cases, sided with the children and ordered, contrary to state law and contrary to federal law, businesses take certain remedial actions for climate change. They've been doing this for a while. Fox News has a story on this. A new report from the Alliance for Consumers argues progressives often use climate change-related activism, and aligned trial lawyers are increasingly using lawsuits not to win big dollars, but to enact public policy changes through the courts, not the legislatures. Since the waning years of the Obama administration, the Alliance for Consumers said that courtrooms have become the battleground for the political left's campaign to reshape American society through strategic litigation. They analyzed employment discrimination cases, environmental suits, and corporate governance litigation and found that the outcomes, or sought-after outcomes, demonstrated a pattern of courtroom strategy meant to deliver policy changes that the left's been unable to achieve through legislation, particularly related to DEI and climate. If you really want to understand a substantial portion of why corporate America went really woke, there's a story that can be told. O.H. Skinner, the executive director for the Alliance for Consumers, told Fox News Digital. Skinner said that corporate America believed President Obama would be followed by President Clinton, demonstrating continuity in many of the policy goals, leading people to leave civil service jobs to join corporate HR and legal departments and bring their policy goals with them. Skinner alleges officials in Washington signaled companies could face scrutiny if they didn't align with emerging DEI priorities. That's describing a world where through government lawsuits, but also through private lawsuits, a lot of pressure was being brought on corporate America, said Skinner, whose previous work included time with the Arizona Attorney General Mark Bromwich. God rest his soul, he recently passed away, who led the state's largest consumer protection lawsuit against Google over location tracking. And again, time and time again, and Bromwich discovered that these progressive groups were working hand in hand with progressive corporations, and those progressive corporations were using settlements with governments, particularly with the Obama administration, and hoping to settle with the Clinton administration to settle in ways that bound government and bound state and local government to left-wing policy agendas on climate change, on DEI, and things like that. This is one of the reasons so many banks in this country started considering, for example, banking with gun groups. You have a gun store in the country, they got to have a bank somewhere to put their cash. And what progressive groups were doing was they were targeting these banks buying up shares in the companies, using their shareholder clout to force the banks to stop doing banking with gun businesses. I know offhand 3 different gun stores, the owners of which are friends of mine, whose banks sent them letters saying, we're shutting down your account. No explanation whatsoever given. And it was because progressive groups were pressuring the banks to not do that. Some banks, if you go use your debit card to buy a gun at a gun store, the transactions decline because the banks have imposed these policies because of progressive pressure and because of lawsuits, insurance companies and the like being sued by progressive groups. It's a real problem. And the right, thankfully, is finally starting to figure out and stand up to challenge them. But in a lot of these cases, there haven't been right-wing groups that have been able to stand up and fund pro se cases and fund the litigation because you have a massive donor interest by the left. The left has these shadowy groups like Arabella that will take progressive donor money and then use that money to fund causes under the table so you don't know where it's getting funded. Like, for example, there's a great tie into this. The Republican National Committee, the National Republican Congressional Committee that runs the campaigns for the House Republicans, and the National Republican Senatorial Committee are all outraising their Democratic counterparts. The RNC has more money than the DNC. The NRSC for the Senate has more money than the Democratic Senate Campaign Committee. The National Republican Congressional Committee has more money than the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. And people are like, well, this means the Republicans are going to win. Their head and shoulders have more money. No. Because what the left is doing is they don't trust the party committees to spend the money, so they're outsourcing to third-party groups that are supposedly either nonprofit or they fly under the radar, and they're doing the outside work of the Democratic Party now. And by flying under the radar, by using outside groups, these outside groups aren't beholden to the disclosures that the political groups are. So you don't know where they're spending. You know, the left pioneered going through law firms like Perkins Coie and others, where they were paying the lawyers in these groups in order to mask transactions so that people on the right couldn't see how they were spending money. It was legal fees. That's been one of the ways the left has done this. They go through left-wing lawyer groups. By the way, I full disclosure here, when I was a lawyer, I represented a couple of people for Congress, and they would send the money, pay me through my law firm, and I could do the ad buys and stuff for them. As a lawyer, I was representing my clients, and it looked like it was a payment to my law firm, but it was actually they were sending money to me, and the competition didn't know. The left has been doing this for a very long time. What the left is also doing now is they're hiring lawyers to advance lawsuits. They're going into court districts where they know the judges are going to be favorable to them, and then they're trying to get policy wins through judges who are also left aligned that then bind states and communities and businesses to the left's agenda because they're not really concerned about democracy. They don't really care about democracy. They care about power. And if their power can't come from the legislature, their power is going to come through like-minded judges. And again, in a number of states, you have progressive trial lawyers who get to pick the Supreme Court judges even in conservative states, and it would behoove those states to break up the structure of how their Supreme Courts are picked. Because in conservative states, you have liberal Supreme Courts that are actually giving the left policy wins they couldn't even get in federal court because the federal court judges are conservative. It is lawfare, and it is to advance the climate change agenda for the left, the DEI agenda for the left, the anti-gun agenda for the left, and the right is starting to figure it out. And by the way, this is going to take right-wing donors standing up. It's going to take right-wing donors funding right-wing alternatives to go into court and file these lawsuits. It's going to take right-wing donors funding campaigns in states like Wyoming to break up the composition of their Supreme Court by getting rid of the ability of liberal trial lawyers to advance liberal judges to the Supreme Courts of conservative states. Conservative donors have got to engage in this stuff, and so often they want to throw their money away on nonsensical causes and vanity projects. The left is continuing to advance in courts because too many donors on the right are engaged in vanity projects instead of realizing your money is better spent standing up and fighting the left in court and fighting these causes and funding these groups to break up the liberal control of the trial lawyer alliance out there. Hello, welcome. It is Eric Erickson here, 877-973-7425. Let's go to Charleston, West Virginia. Ben, you're going to be up next. Welcome.
Hello, Mr. Erickson. How are you doing today?
Great. What's going on?
I just wanted to call and first off, thank you for your stance on coal. As a West Virginian, lifelong West Virginian, I understand the importance of the industry to the state. It's very vital, and, it's another example. The Democrats, their stance on coal, it's another example of how out of touch they are with the common folk. If I may for a second, my grandfather was a career coal miner, and God bless his soul, he passed away in 2022, but he was what we call a West Virginia Democrat, meaning that, he voted Democrat, but up until Barack Obama, and that's because he was so against coal, and ever since then he voted Republican. Was a registered Democrat till the day he died, but once they went so far left on coal, that was it for him and so many others in the state, which is why and how the state, used to be reliably blue, but now it's reliably red. So I just wanted to call and share that.
Look, I appreciate it. And I was going to get to the more deeper story here, Ben, when I get back on Trump wanting to expand coal usage. Coal is good. Coal is renewable. We also get natural gas as a byproduct, and the president wants to re-expand it, and I think it's a great thing for the government. We are shuttering coal plants at a time China is building 100 for every one we're closing down. Think about that. China is investing in a massive build-out of coal-fired power plants, because they know they can be operated cheaply. You can get them going faster than a nuclear plant. They're more reliable than wind or solar, and they produce cheap energy to fuel the demand. And AI, whether you want to like it or not, believe in it or not, we're going to need to be competitive in AI against China. We're going to need to dominate, and so we need power. And the left is actually trying to starve us of power, and they're working with the Chinese. When I come back, new data out on the ties between some of the big left-wing agitators in this country and the Chinese Communist Party. Stick around for that. But first, let me tell you about Old Glory Bank. They are my bank. They can be your bank. OldGloryBank.com/Eric. OldGloryBank.com/ERICK. Old Glory Bank was started by conservatives because of the debanking trends I've been talking about. Progressives targeting banks to punish conservatives and shut down their business operations. Now that the president is Donald Trump and not Joe Biden, that's less of a concern. But what is a concern is having a bank that actually wants to work with your business. And so many banks these days have become kind of business unfriendly. They take you for granted. And individuals in particular just completely take you for granted. Old Glory Bank doesn't do that. They're very hands-on. They want to get to know you. I, again, was a customer of theirs before I started asking them to advertise on the program so I could share them with you. OldGloryBank.com/Eric. They're one of the fastest growing banks in the country. They're headquartered in Oklahoma City. They're an online bank, but they made it easy even to deposit cash at the bank. You go to OldGloryBank.com/Eric today. You can find out more. They're about to be publicly traded on NASDAQ. They're growing great. They're going to be publicly traded. They are a fantastic company. And you should check out Old Glory Bank at oldglorybank.com/Eric for your business. If you're an active duty military, they will waive fees for you in a lot of cases. Find out more at oldglorybank.com/Eric. Member FDIC, equal housing lender. Terms and conditions apply. Greetings. Welcome. It is Eric Erickson here. The phone number is 877-973-7425. If you want to be on the program, David calling from San Francisco, California. Welcome, sir. How are you?
Not too bad, Eric. I got to disagree with you. A few minutes ago, you were talking about coal being renewable.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you only got to wait about 4 million years for it. The wind is always blowing. The sun shines on a regular basis, 50% of the day, and those are called renewables. But coal is definitely not. It's going to take you about 1 million years, and the idea that America, it grew strong by burning rocks, but the idea that those rocks are running out, and when you start looking at the loss, I heard you had a caller from, I'm not sure if that was North Carolina, but mountaintop removal has basically wasted so many mountain valleys. They used to have resorts where you could go fishing. They used to have all sorts of neat things exploring, in hollers. There was a lot of opportunity in there, side industries that are totally lost once those mountaintops were removed. And then you end up with pollution in the creek and in the rivers and all sorts of things.
Yeah.
So,
and by the way, I got to stop you, David, and say, yeah, you're right. And it's charcoal that's renewable. It's not coal. At the same time, coal's pretty cheap, and the wind doesn't always blow, which is why I kind of think we need an all of the above approach.
Well, and that's the real purpose of the call. If you look at, Aesop's fables, there was the old line about don't put all your eggs in one basket. A week or two ago, Donald Trump decided that wind is not going to happen in America. He decided to cut off all grants and all subsidies and all development of wind power in America. Well, Texas is a pretty conservative state. And Texas is using 1/3 of the electricity every day is coming from wind power. 1/3 of it. So, for Donald Trump to pretend that wind power is some sort of a failure, he's just full of it.
Now, but hang on a second. This is part of the problem, though, is in Texas, I think they overcorrected. Just a couple of years ago, they had the windmills froze and the power went out because they didn't build enough nuclear power plants. And that I think, David, is part of my problem here is that we've kind of overcorrected. Like, for example, in Georgia, we have some massive solar fields now in the state of Georgia, but we have a lot of cloudy and rainy days where they're not producing power. But demands from the Obama administration, echoed by the Biden administration, required that power companies get X percentage of their power from wind and solar, and it just doesn't work. Like, I recognize that in the Southwest, where there's a desert and it rarely rains, solar makes a lot of sense. Solar doesn't actually make sense in Georgia. And in addition, part of the problem in a place like Georgia is that the solar power also took over fallow fields, and a lot of farmers sold to the power companies and reduced the land for meat consumption. So, yeah, you're right. I got it wrong. Coal is not renewable, but it's still pretty cheap compared to the other. Natural gas as well. And kudos to the Trump administration for expanding the use of coal again. Again, China is building massive amounts of coal-powered plants because the power is relatively cheap. And wind and solar may be great in some places, but not every place. And I also like the offshore wind mills where they're doing to whales and stuff. I don't know that we need to go down that direction. Look, if you want a windmill and a solar panel on your house, go for it. I got too many trees around my house to do solar. Otherwise, I probably would. But I think we've made a mistake by getting rid of the coal-powered plants in this country as quickly as we did, and we need to be prioritizing nuclear in this country. Now, related to this, you need to know something. Where is this story here? This is from the New York Post. I've been saying this for a while. This is another story. I was right. This is from the New York Post. The State Department transmitted a report to Congress Tuesday linking left-wing nonprofits Code Pink and the People's Forum to Chinese influencer operations. Partisan hacks spent years peddling the phony Russian collusion hoax while turning a blind eye to the sprawling web of far-left activist organizations who push the agendas of the Chinese Communist Party. Undersecretary of State for Public Diplomacy Sarah Rogers sent in a statement provided to the Post. Organizations like Code Pink and the People's Forum denigrate the United States, whitewash the violence of Marxist regimes, and cover for China while enjoying an influx of cash from a donor network connected to the Chinese Communist Party. The State Department will pursue complete transparency for the donor and NGO networks that lobby for our adversaries and seek to weaken the resolve of the United States. The report on countering foreign information manipulation interference alleges that China spreads propaganda through influence campaigns run by nonprofit groups like Code Pink, the People's Forum, and groups linked with the notorious Singham Network. The Singham Network are nonprofits funded by Neville Roy Singham, whose wife is the co-founder of Code Pink. Singham, an American expat living in China, works closely with the Chinese government media machine and is financing its propaganda network, worldwide. Code Pink was founded as an anti-war group, and it has increasingly become a hotbed of Chinese communist sentiment. And you will recall that one of the people in Congress who was great friends with one of the Code Pink leaders was Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's now out. Did I see the other day she went back on Steve Bannon's show? Maybe it's an old clip, but she was on Steve Bannon's show. The woman who seemed to care about the Jeffrey Epstein stuff seemed really not to care enough to do anything about it. Back in the 1980s and 90s, a lot of environmentalist groups were referred to on the right as watermelons. They were green on the outside and red on the inside. They were funded by the Soviets. And we know when the Soviet Union fell and we had access to the KGB archives that the Soviets spent a lot of time propping up environmentalist and anti-nuclear groups in the United States to try to sabotage our growth of nuclear weapons and nuclear power plants. In fact, the Chinese are using the Soviet playbook and trying to starve us of energy. Some of the largest left-wing groups that have been attacking coal-powered plants in the United States used to be funded by the Soviets and undoubtedly are funded by the Chinese communists now. The largest anti-nuclear groups in the United States were back in the 80s and early 90s funded by the Soviets. Till the collapse of the Soviet Union and the Russians changed their ways. They're probably funded by the Chinese communists now. We know Code Pink has been pretty hostile to the idea of nuclear power and power generation and self-sufficiency in the United States, also pushing wind and solar, among other things. It's just amazing how the left aligns on this sort of stuff constantly. Look, if you want solar, that's fine. And if you want wind, that's fine. But legislating and prioritizing solar and wind at the expense of nuclear and natural gas is insane. Look what happened to Texas when they prioritized windmills and solar panels that were covered in snow and froze, and the lights went out in Texas because they hadn't built enough nuclear power plants and they had turned off so many coal power plants. We have in this country the rise of data centers. You may not like the data centers, but data centers are going to be the key to our national security moving forward because the data centers is where AI gets generated, and whoever dominates AI is going to dominate the 21st century. But to dominate AI, you've got to have a dominant power grid. It's why the Chinese have been working so hard to try to sabotage our power grid and hack our power grid because they want to be able to turn out the lights in the United States and dominate. And again, look at China. All of you people who think we can't let China get ahead of us, why are you not demanding we build more coal-powered plants in this country? Because that's what China's doing. They love to talk about their green energy. They love to show you the mountains covered in solar panels so that you can't see the plants anymore. They love to show you the windmills in China. What they're not showing you is the hundreds and hundreds of power plants that are being built that burn coal because you can get them going cheaply. And it's cheap energy to fund their AI data centers. And you will note how so much of the American left and the American media cover for China and ignore the number of coal power plants they're building. We need nuclear in this country, and frankly, we need to turn back on the coal power plants. Instead of tearing down the smokestacks, we need to be building the smokestacks. And we need natural gas in this country. You know, one of the other problems of this country, and again, it's left-wing environmental agitators funded by the Chinese communists are blocking the production of pipelines in this country to distribute natural gas and oil. Again, I'm not making that up. It is well documented. A lot of the environmental groups are taking money under the table from the communist Chinese, and they go out and they file lawsuits to drive up the costs of building pipelines in this country to distribute natural gas. And in New England, did you read during that cold snap a couple of weeks ago where it snowed so much and ice, people were literally burning wood and trash to stay alive. The renewable energy sources used in New England had included trash and wood. People were cutting down trees because the power was off with no signs of getting back, and they were having to burn, which, by the way, isn't good because they didn't let the wood cure, but they had to do it to stay warm. We should not be sabotaging our power grid to placate the left in this country, and that's what we're doing. They don't want us to build data centers, and I got concerns with where we put the data centers, but we're going to have them if we're going to stay competitive with China. Decline is a choice, and too many people are being indoctrinated by the left unknowingly to choose to decline in this country. We're either going to stand up against China or they're going to dominate. And if they dominate, your freedom is going to go away. Your freedom of speech will be curbed in this country. You think it can't happen, but it will. Your freedoms will go away if the Chinese dominate. And there are a lot of left-wing groups in this country that are taking money from the Chinese to make our freedoms go away under the cover of saving the planet. To the phones we go. John in Dayton, Ohio, you're going to be up next. Welcome, sir. How are you?
Very good today, sir. Thank you.
Sure. What's going on?
My question's in regard to the water usage on the data centers. I've heard you mention a couple of times that like that enormous amount of water they look to use is a lot of times like a one-time fill. And from what I'm seeing, if I'm understanding what you're saying, they're looking to do 2 or 3 in our nearby areas and such, where they're telling the citizens and the water operations and such that you're looking at like 1 million gallons usage daily. And so I, do a quick Google search, hey, are data centers, is this like a one-time fill or what's the requirements daily? Where on Google it's saying like 1 to 5 million gallons of water usage a day, depending on the size of the data center. So I don't know if you could comment on that.
It's listen, they use a lot of water on a daily basis. And what they typically do in almost every case is they fill up water tanks. And those water tanks, by the way, can use as much water as 1,000 to 2,000 households or more. In some cases, it's 5 million gallons of water, which is about 50,000 residential households. But they fill up the tank, and then they renew the water. So they recycle the water over time. They're not pulling 5 million gallons of water a year out of a city's municipal source. It's a one-time fill that recirculates. Now, it does evaporate, and so they do replenish it, but the replenishment rate isn't as high. But a lot of people are getting spooked by these numbers saying they're going to take 5 million gallons. There are parts of the country in drought where they don't need to be built because that one-time intake that they're using is going to be too much. But in a lot of the country, it's a scare scenario that, oh my God, they're going to be using 5 million gallons of water a year. Not really. They fill up their tanks with 5 million gallons of water, and they use that to cool over time. And occasionally they will flush some and pour back in, or the water will evaporate over time in some cases, and they have to refill. But it's not a constant 5 million gallons of water. It's not an annual 5 million gallons of water. People kind of misunderstand how these tanks are filled and stored. Increasingly, states are requiring minimal evaporative chains. That is, when they pump the water in, it's got to be into a covered facility to minimize, in a sealed facility to minimize the evaporation as they go through. So the reason they don't want you to know about the water usage is not because they don't want you to know because they're afraid you'll see they're using all your water. It's because a competitor, knowing how much water a data center is going to intake, a competitor can tell how many chips they're putting in the data center to process. And it's a closely guarded secret among these data companies as to what they're putting in a data center, how much the compute power of the data center is going to be, et cetera. And by you looking at the water consumption, they can tell. And my understanding from talking to a lot of people, I'm willing to be wrong. Maybe they're lying through their teeth to me. But my understanding from talking to a lot of people, including municipal water authorities, is that these numbers that are scaring people are a one-time source. In a drought-starved area like the Southwest, probably a bad idea to put in data centers because they don't have a lot of water to begin with. But in a place like Georgia where we do get regular rainfall, you could fill these tanks up the first time and then they're sipping water thereafter from the municipal system for evaporation. And the greater the sealing in the chambers, the less evaporation there is, which local governments can insist on. There are a lot of people out there, though, trying to scare you about the data centers. And while I have problems with them being near residential neighborhoods because of the noise they can generate. If these companies go belly up, because I think we're in a bubble, there are concerns. But generally speaking, the bottom line is if we're not building data centers and China is, this is a national security issue for us ultimately, and we need to find places in the country willing to build the data centers to be able to stay competitive with China. Welcome back. It is Eric Erickson. Last call. Keith, going to you. Welcome to the show, sir. How are you?
All right, brother. How you doing?
Great.
Good. So, yeah, I heard someone talk about data centers. Just retired from the Army. I am a corporate chaplain and community impact manager for QTS data centers. And that's what put out some misinformation. So, like our designs, Freedom Design, they don't actually use any local water. We actually have rain catchment on the roof. We actually use less water than a small restaurant because that's just for like the restaurant for the employee bathrooms. And then we actually run our own power lines in so that way we don't burden the local systems. And in Fayetteville, Georgia, for example, they're actually looking to lower the tax rates for local employees, and they're actually going to keep energy costs the same or lower for the next couple of years because of the amount of money we're bringing in. So it's just
that's the other.
There is a lot of misinformation from.
A lot of people scared. And by the way, so I just looked up. The Brookings Institute has like the big Google data centers and stuff. They said that they've reduced their water usage by 70% over the past few years because of these closed containment cooling systems, and more and more states are requiring they cover their own power costs. So the regulation is keeping up because we need it, and there is so much fear out there. And misunderstanding. A lot of people just really believe when they hear 5 million gallons, that's going to be 5 million gallons a day pulled in. It's a one-time thing for some of these major cooling systems, and then they keep the water in. Let me tell you about Eden Pure and the Eden Pure Thunderstorm. You can get 3 of them for less than, you save $200. I think it's around $200 for 3 of them still. The price really hadn't gone up much, and you can get a money-back guarantee on them as well if they are not wiping out odors. So I use them. I keep one in my travel bag. They're small. You can plug it in with a USB cord or directly into the wall. You go to EdenPureDeals.com, put in the discount code ERIC3, ERICK3. You will wipe out odors. They also get rid of dust and pollen and stuff in the air. They kill bacteria and viruses, but they eliminate odors. So if you're in a hotel room and someone has smoked in the hotel room before you got there, you plug in the Eden Pure Thunderstorm, it'll wipe out those odors. You get in a rental car, someone smoked in the rental car, it'll wipe out those odors. You're in your kitchen, you fried fish in the kitchen, the house smells, it'll wipe out those odors. Litter box odors, dirty diaper odors. And if they don't work for you, you get a money-back guarantee. Go to Eden Pure Deals today. Eden like the Garden of Eden, pure as the driven snow. EdenPureDeals.com. Put in the discount code ERIC3, ERICK3. You can get 3 of them. You save $200. You got a money-back guarantee. They will wipe out odors. I use mine frequently, and they work.